all of you lovely folks who came in person. We appreciate it. But you all are lovely too. Just because you're not here, feels the same. I'm looking for Kim, my co-chair. I think I see her. She's so tall. Kim, are you right here?
I am right here, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I can't be there in person.
That might be the first time you weren't by my side. But
I'm
I'm
there in spirit.
I feel you right there though. So we're gonna call the meeting now. So let's formally get started. How are you? Michael, you're in person. Right, okay. All right, so good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Obviously, this is the July meeting of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. We're gonna begin with the usual housekeeping items that we have to take care of at the beginning of this meeting. And then we're going to take public comment. We're going to do that up front. Okay, great, sir. As you see, Chris Hoagland has changed quite a bit.
Improvement.
Yes. Chris is very sad that he's not able to be here today. He's in a nuclear drill today. Yeah. So at the last minute, see how people do you. At the last minute, 2 seconds ago, he asked Rachel if she could do this for her. And she's obviously well equipped to do it. So Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you, I think.
Yeah, so good afternoon. I'm going to go through roll call and then we'll take a motion on the minutes. So Secretary McElwain here, and I saw Kim. Is Dr. Wright here or her representative? How about Secretary Addicks?
I'm here for Secretary.
Secretary Kurtz?
Ryland's here for Secretary Kurtz.
Ryland. Secretary Chaudhry?
Anna DeBelius is here for Secretary Chaudhry.
Secretary Thompson?
Darren Lovas here for Secretary Thompson.
Darren. Secretary Flora?
It's Jason Dubo for Secretary Flora. She'll be here soon now.
Great. Director Speaks Bachman? Here. President Morales Wilhelm?
Dave Namazi here for President Morales Wilhelm.
Jamie Riley?
Here.
Eric Fisher?
I am here.
Thank you, Eric. David Lapp?
William Bolgiano here for David Lapp.
Great, thank you. Dr. Dickerson?
You're muted.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm here. Thank you very much.
And I see you, Dr. Gilden. Thank you. Senator Feldman? Michael?
I'm here.
Jennifer? Ms. Ross?
Here.
Thank you. Delegate Stein?
Here.
Beth Harbor?
Here.
David Smedick?
Here.
Brian Magali?
Here.
Administrator Belton? How about our Michael Bibb? Chair Barbe?
Alexis Foxworth here for Chairman Barbe.
Thank you. And I see Kim from the Comptroller's office. And Secretary Strickland?
It's Mike Hidson here for Secretary Strickland.
Okay, thank you, Mike. All right, anyone that I missed? Okay, and then we also have the draft meeting minutes from the May meeting that were distributed. Are there any amendments or changes? Okay, then I think Secretary, you'll entertain a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second? Okay, I see both Michael and David. All right, all in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
And I'll wait till Jared sees got all the votes up on the screen.
Okay, great.
Okay, I think that's unanimous. I'll turn it back to you then.
Thank you so much for that. So first, we're going to continue when we think about the agenda for today. We're going to continue the discussion on opportunities to support climate financing in Maryland. We're going to have a presentation from the Climate Policy Initiative and S2 Strategies. After that, we're going to hear from our Eco Working Group co-chairs. They're going to tell us all about the incredible growth and impact from the 2026 Maryland Climate Teach-In. I can't wait to hear about that, by the way. And then last, we are pleased to welcome Comptroller Learman. She's going to give us an update on the climate change cost report. Let's see. So now I think we can just get right into the presentation. So earlier this year, just to set a little context.
Actually, my fault. We should do public comment first.
Thank you. That's why you're here.
That was my fault. Is anyone here for public comments or anyone in the chat? Please put your name and affiliation in.
James Marco.
Jamie, is your hand still up from the vote, or did you want to comment on anything?
Sorry about that.
Anyone else for public comment? Okay, hearing none, then yes, please continue.
All right. Earlier this year, we asked the policy, the Climate Policy Initiative and S2 Strategies to help us answer some of the fundamental questions that we've been talking about since we really started this year, last year. We've been talking about climate financing. Some of the questions that we wanted answered is how much investment is already flowing into Maryland to support our climate goals? How much do we actually need? And how can this state use our limited resources to strategically close that gap? This is really important right now. We know that we're operating with a constrained fiscal environment. We know the budget is tight. Our state resources alone is just not enough for us to meet the scale of investment that's actually required to achieve the climate goals that we have. We've been talking about this for 3.5 years. We need to understand, though, how can we better use public dollars so that we can unlock substantially a lot of public investment. And I don't think that we've done that to the scale in which we need to do. So the analysis that you're about to hear about, it really gives us the information that we've been asking for the first time. We're going to get a clear picture of how much climate investment is actually flowing into Maryland, where is it going, and where we have opportunities to attract more. It also gives us some practical recommendations that we can think about in terms of what can we do next. So with that, I am going to turn it over to the team to walk us through those findings.
And they're joining us virtually today, so they're online. So go ahead, Michelle.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having us and inviting us to this meeting. We're very happy to be here and great to see familiar faces from the process as well as new ones as well. So my name is Michelle Lee. I'm a senior analyst at Climate Policy Initiative based in Washington, D.C. And I'm joined by Franz Hochstrater, a colleague of mine at S2 Strategies. If we could move to the next slide, please, Jared. I think the secretary did a great job providing us with an overview of the project and the background behind it. And so today, we're really here to walk you through our analysis, including needs estimations, tracked climate finance flows, and policy recommendations. And then we will have time for questions as well. So if there's anything you'd like to hear more about, please feel free to either save your questions for the end or also insert them into the chat. And if we could move to the next slide, I will now quickly go through the project overview and objectives and moving to the next slide. So just a brief overview is that this was a collaboration between Climate Policy Initiative and S2 Strategies. CPI is a global climate finance and analysis organization with deep expertise in climate finance tracking. And S2 is an advisory firm with a strong background in energy policy and finance at the federal, state, and local levels, and is also the secretariat of the U.S. Green Bank 50. And so moving to the next slide, as the secretary highlighted in this project, we had 3 main focus areas, which were needs, flows, and policy recommendations. And so within this, we try to collate and synthesize existing climate finance needs estimates in Maryland. On the flow side, we analyze flows in 3 sectors, being energy systems, buildings, and transportation. And I will think one thing I'll highlight throughout this presentation is that this was our first pilot exercise in trying to understand climate finance flows in Maryland. And so much of what we learned in collaboration with MDE during this was understanding what data sources currently exist. So what do we know, but also what are the gaps? What don't we know? And then from there, we worked to provide policy recommendations to close the gap, looking at both across the short, medium, and long term. And so moving to the next slide, for folks who are less familiar with what is climate finance, so Climate Policy Initiative, we approach climate finance from a broad perspective. And so we really see it as all the financial resources that are directed to mitigation and adaptation activities. And so this includes both market rate and concessional finance. It includes instruments ranging from grants to debt and equity, and it includes finance from both public and private sources. So money that both comes from like the federal government or the state government, but also money coming from the private sector. So coming from commercial financial institutions, institutional investors, corporates, households, and other similar actors. And so moving to the next slide, I think just want to set a little bit of what the scope of this analysis was. As climate finance tracking can be quite intensive, and so we took a limited scope on this project. So as I mentioned before, we identified 3 key sectors being energy systems, buildings, and transportation, both because we anticipated there being a high level of climate finance flows in those sectors, and just they're, of course, quite important to Maryland to help meet Maryland's climate goals. And then I think just a little bit on the kind of temporal analysis. We did analysis from Maryland fiscal year 2021 to fiscal year 2024. And within that today, I'll speak a lot about fiscal year 2024. However, I think one key point and limitation was that Maryland has done a really great job in improving the climate budget tagging efforts at the state level, with the fiscal year 2025 data being really excellent, and we were able to look into that. However, our private sector data only went up through calendar year 2024. So because of this temporal difference, we weren't able for this project to be able to compare the state level climate finance mobilization beyond the SEEF money and Empower money to private finance. And so I'll just note that as a limitation for folks as we talk through the presentation, that I'm going to show you numbers, but the state's own GHG emissions reduction spending is not currently reflected in those numbers, but could be in a future iteration. And then moving to the next slide, as I said before, this really is a preliminary assessment. And so we took together a lot of data sources. CPI has a really comprehensive database of climate finance. And so that means that we took data sources, including public databases on energy and infrastructure investments, venture capital, and then we supplemented that with data from USA Spending, as well as data provided to us by the state of Maryland. But that being said, this is likely an underestimation. I would see this as a number as a floor. And we do have continued data gaps and methodological challenges. I won't go into too much depth, but I think some of the key gaps to keep in mind is that we're not counting county level or municipal level spend. We're missing federal tax credits from this data. Households and corporates are notoriously difficult to track climate finance from, so we're not seeing them in this analysis. And similarly, it's very challenging to track incremental spend for energy efficiency in buildings. So those are just some of the gaps in our analysis as we move forward. And so then moving on, we'll get to the fun part, which is where you start to get into some of the analysis. So if we can go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about our estimated needs. And so on this slide, what we see here is really, I think, the key message is that Maryland has strong climate finance mobilization from federal, private, and SEEF sources. In fiscal year 2024, we were able to track $3.8 billion in climate finance in these 3 sectors. And so that is significant mobilization. And so then from our needs estimate, we saw an upper range of the total needs, and this includes capital needed from the private sector, as well as the public sector. And so we saw that those total needs were at a ceiling of $6.8 billion. And so what we see here is that means that there's a really large gap. We need about 1.4 to 1.8 times more climate finance in the state of Maryland to meet this estimation, which I will say, as I said before, is likely an underestimation, particularly on the needs side. These needs estimates are coming from, perhaps are at this point about 3 to 4 years old. And so that means that they aren't necessarily indicative of current energy demand projections, as well as the current federal financing environment. But I think the key message here is that there is a gap here. However, that gap is it is a gap that can be closed. And so Maryland has the momentum, and now there's a real question of how to effectively deploy public dollars to more strategically leverage private finance to fill this gap. And so if we move to the next slide, this just provides a little bit more information on the needs estimates that we collated. So you can see kind of how we got to the 5.2 to 6.8 billion a year. Those were sourced from the Center for Climate Strategies and Princeton's Net Zero America. Many of you are probably familiar with the $1 billion a year estimate from the Climate Pollution Reduction Plan. And just to flag that number really focuses on public finance needed. And then we also had some sectoral estimates that we included in our full analysis to MDE. And if we move to the next slide, I want to dig in a little bit more to that, the private finance that we were able to see mobilize and kind of understand where's that money coming from, where is it going, and what Insights Maryland can take away from that. So moving to the next slide, we see here that 86% of climate finance from private, federal, and SEEF sources went to energy systems and transport, and 14% went to buildings. So we did more analysis here at the sectoral level. And so I would say some key findings that I think are really important is from the energy system side, we saw in our data a relatively even split between wind and solar from these sources. So that was relatively even. And then in transport, we do see that household purchases of electric vehicles does drive spending in the transport sector. One thing I'll note here is if you look at the buildings number, you might ask yourself that that's a lot of energy efficiency and much of it is unspecified. And I think this really speaks to what I mentioned earlier, which is that there are methodological challenges in tracking energy efficiency spend to the solution level in buildings, and that number is likely a vast underestimate. If we move to the next slide, the next thing I want to really drive home is that of this 3.8 billion, the vast majority of this is coming from the private sector. And so I think for this audience, they're really a key takeaway is that the private sector is doing a lot in climate finance in Maryland, and they are contributing quite substantially, particularly in energy systems and transportation as well from our data. And then we also do see federal contributions and some SEEF numbers here as well for fiscal year 2024. And on the next slide, we also did some analysis looking at this over time. So from fiscal year 2021 to fiscal year 2024. And so what we see is we saw an increase in climate finance from fiscal year 2021 onwards. Some of this could be data, some of this could be a post-COVID as well. But what we see is that that number has been sustained since then. So we're seeing these sustained level of investments, primarily driven, again, by transport and energy systems. You'll see in fiscal year 2022, there's a bit of a spike in transport spend from the private sector, and that is because that is the year that much of the financing for the private financing for the Purple Line PPP was tracked in our database. And so I think another thing to highlight here is I know that MDE has done a lot of efforts to really strengthen Maryland's relationship with the international climate finance community. And so in any of these given years, our data showed that 12 to 40% of this private finance came from international private finance institutions, so international commercial banks primarily. And so I think that that's also a really interesting finding as well. And so on the next slide, I wanted to just give a little bit of a taste that we have talked a lot about the private sector, but we also did do longitudinal analysis where possible of Maryland's state climate finance. And so in particular, we looked at the SEEF allocations. And so SEEF allocations on climate finance have grown, and much of that growth has occurred within energy systems and the building sector as well. And so this is in line with, of course, the growing capitalization of SEEF from alternative compliance payments. Although I think something we would flag, of course, is that that growth is not, is projected to taper off eventually. And so I think a key thing to highlight here, just for folks' awareness, is that this doesn't capture the entire SEEF capitalization. We went through Climate Policy Initiative, we went through and we tagged SEEF's data from the annual reports to a climate finance taxonomy. And so some key areas that are missing are the EUSP bill assistance and other things like that, which were not classified as climate finance for this exercise. But I think the key takeaway here is that we see that SEEF has grown and we see a really strong focus on energy systems, and then buildings has seen a bit of fluctuation in the amount of funding, with transport receiving the smallest proportion. And so with that, I'll hand over to my colleague Franz to take us through the next slides and talk through some of the policy recommendations on how we kind of close the climate finance gap and build on the impressive momentum thus far.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle. Hello, everyone. Franz Hochstrasser with S2 Strategies. So we'll turn to the from the finance analysis at this point to what the state can actually do about addressing that annual finance gap. And the central opportunity, as we see it, is very practical, to use state dollars more strategically to mobilize more private capital in helping to achieve the governor's objectives and the state's objectives for secure, clean, affordable, and reliable energy while advancing the state's goals. So so we've got the 4 themes up here. We conducted 22 interviews with state, local, and private stakeholders, including many of you in your agencies, and we organized these recommendations into 4 main themes, and I'll get into each of these in depth, but first is lowering the cost of capital and crowding in more private investment, so that overarching theme really there. Second is aligning financing offerings with policies that Maryland's already pursuing, because you have great policy already underway. Third is to amplify Maryland's financing and technical assistance channels. Again, many great examples already working. And fourth, to build durable climate finance capacity in Maryland for the longer term. So I'll cover each of these themes and then have 3 sector-specific examples that we've pulled out that are sort of a great immediate term opportunities. So on to the next slide here. The first theme is really the highest leverage theme. We call it sort of funding to financing. And, you know, as I mentioned, Maryland has historically deployed significant public funding through grants. And grants remain essential, especially for low-income and disadvantaged communities, as well as early-stage project development, where the risk is very high. But where projects have repayment potential, public dollars can actually go quite a bit further through credit enhancements to leverage more private capital. So what do we mean? The first recommendation here is to develop an interagency framework that identifies which programs can legally and practically shift some of its funding from direct grants toward catalytic finance like loan loss reserves, guarantees, bond support, interest rate buy-downs, and revolving capital. The second recommendation is to use public credit support, again, along that same lines, to organize statewide financing capacity. And that could be in the form of pooled financing, unlocking warehouse facilities where you're using some credit support to activate a private capital pool to be used to finance projects, tax-exempt bonds, or portfolio support for clean energy, including storage, buildings, affordable housing, schools, and EV infrastructure. So the immediate step that we recommend here is to do an RFI to identify real projects out there seeking financing and determine where public credit support could unlock deployment. And this type of credit support could be evaluated in concert with work already underway, which I'll highlight in the third recommendation here, which is to use, the third recommendation is to use competitive performance-based capital allocation where markets are ready, building on the reverse auction logic reflected in the Utility Relief Act and directing public funds toward the greatest deployment per dollar. So we've already seen MEA, and I see Secretary Speaks-Bachman here, use this approach of issuing an RFI coming out of the Utility Relief Act for the Megawatts for Maryland project, and that's a great start. That can also be applied in many other project verticals. So theme 2, moving to the next slide, is about making Maryland's existing policy agenda easier to implement. The state already has major initiatives underway, including the Building Energy Performance Standards, clean heat planning, and the public building modernization efforts, as well as storage initiatives for Resilient Maryland and transportation electrification. The question is whether financing is being connected to these policy objectives early enough to make compliance and adoption practical and easier for the practitioners out there developing projects. So the first recommendation here is to pair building sector policy implementation with clear financing pathways. Building owners or affordable housing providers and public institutions and households need to understand not only what's required, but how improvements can be funded. And I'll return to this one towards the end because we're going to do a deep dive on a few of these recommendations. But the second recommendation under this theme is to create a statewide public buildings and schools finance platform. And capital is available for capital is really already available for well-structured public projects, and we heard that from many interviewees. But much of what is needed in the schools and in local governments to access that capital, and this is not the case for all local governments. Some are moving very quickly, others really do need this support, but is moving from idea to finance-ready transactions. So standardized audits, procurement templates, development support, repeatable financing structures could significantly reduce that friction. And then the third recommendation under this theme is to really treat energy storage systems as targeted reliability and resilience infrastructure, and identify public facilities as well as fleet sites or that can serve as resilience hubs, and identifying where there's grid constraints, with massive amounts of new demand coming online with the build out of data centers and further industrialization. Storage can really be a great value to highlight and deploy more readily. Okay, onto the next slide. So theme 3 is all about reducing market friction and strengthening technical assistance, connecting it more directly to financing. Stakeholders repeatedly told us that the challenge is not only availability of capital, it's moving projects from initial interest through scoping and underwriting to financial close. And so the first recommendation under this theme is to use existing sub-cabinet coordination. So this group is a great forum for that, to create a climate finance implementation roadmap. You already have many of the necessary institutions and tools. The roadmap should assign agency leads and identify financing pathways and establish milestones and clear accountability. And that's something very, very tangible and within your grasp here that you could do in the near term. The second recommendation is to formalize the handoffs among technical assistance and project development and financing. So, for example, a local government or school or nonprofit should not need to understand the entire state financing ecosystem to be able to advance a good project. But agencies, local governments, philanthropies, CDFIs, green banks, and private capital should have clear referral pathways, so they know when to hand off a contact and exactly where to direct them to find what they need. And then the third recommendation, again under this theme, is to move quickly on elective pay and bridge financing support while those federal tax credits are available. So, for sub 1.5 megawatt solar projects, they're still eligible to get the investment tax credit from the federal government through elective pay for projects that are placed in service before the end of 2027. And a lot of those entities are what we're talking about, who need that TA support to access financing. And then storage, ITC is eligible through the end of 2024. 2034. And offering standardized legal, accounting, intake, and bridge financing assistance could really help those public entities like schools and nonprofits and local governments capture those incentives before they go away. The fourth theme here on the next slide is longer-term market building agenda, creating financing tools that remain useful as the federal policy changes, as unfortunately we've seen it happen very dramatically over the last year and a half. But the first recommendation here is to really think hard about using inclusive utility investment or utility-linked on-bill financing or other customer-friendly financing pathways that remove some of the friction from customer adoption or household-level adoption. And these tools are really particularly relevant for low and moderate income households or multifamily buildings that struggle with the split incentive challenge with a landlord and a tenant, where upfront costs are difficult to cover. And we've seen that starting to work up in Massachusetts as they advance an affordability bill up there. So the immediate step here would be to look into the legal and consumer protection and financing design work. Second recommendation here is to build a segmented electric vehicle charging finance strategy that identifies the difference in financing needs between corridor fast charging, multifamily sort of level 2 workplace charging, and then fleet and curbside. And they're not one market. And I'll return to this example shortly because y'all are making great progress over at MDOT on this already. But and the third recommendation under this theme, and the last one I'll cover today, is to put targeted state market development tools on the 2027 and beyond agenda, including tools that strengthen local project development, like maybe you have a developer core through the Maryland Climate Corps, or business formation and access to capital or technology adoption, like a state checkoff campaign to funnel some of the funds from sale on clean electricity or clean energy generation into further marketing and public engagement to drive more adoption. Okay, so digging deep here on a few examples, one in each sector, and I'll try to go quickly here, but these final 3 slides really illustrate the detail behind some of the recommendations. It's only so much we can cover in the few minutes we've got here, but excited for your questions. So for the energy sector, to dig in, recommendation 2, to use public credit support to expand statewide public and quasi-public financing capacity. Qualified financing channels could use reserves, guarantees, or credit wraps to lower borrowing costs and aggregate projects. And state agencies or MCEC and local governments could support tax-exempt or taxable financing for portfolios of, again, clean energy, storage, efficiency, affordable housing, public buildings, schools, and EV infrastructure. And as mentioned, MEA has already used the RFI approach to begin gathering project pipeline for reserve auction, but that can also be done to identify where programs can shift to providing credit support versus grants. And actually, there's some research out from University of Maryland Smith School of Business just in the last week. So hat tip to Allison and Rachel for sharing this, and that really undergirds this same recommendation. So lots of momentum here, and the opportunity, I think, is to convert those ideas into a tractable pilot where you're using that type of support. Next, building energy sector. So this is under the MEA bucket, and pairing policy implementation with BEPS or clean heat planning or zero emission equipment policies. The key point here is that financing should not be designed after regulations are complete. It should really be developed alongside implementation so that those building owners can understand both what they must do and then how they can afford to do it. So we're eager to see how Secretary McIlwain and the MEA team are thinking of advancing this work. And then lastly, and I promise I'll stop after this, on transportation, on the last slide, Maryland's EV charging challenge is one of, I think, segmentation, uptime, and financing. And again, hat tip to the MDOT team already thinking this through with the zero emissions vehicle infrastructure plan. as a suitability tool to provide strong foundations here for identifying geographies and market gaps. The next step here, I think, is to connect that planning to distinct financing strategies for corridor, fleet, multifamily, workplace, and curbside. So in closing, I will reiterate what Michelle has said as well, which is Maryland has really strong climate policy and significant public funding streams and very capable institutions. Hat tip to you all for that. The next step here is to really use those assets more deliberately to lower the cost of capital, make projects easier to execute, and mobilize more and more private capital into Maryland's energy, transportation, and building priorities to meet your statewide goals. So it's been an honor to work on this and excited to have a discussion here with the remainder of the time. Thank you.
You, Michelle and Franz, really appreciate your work on this. Before the secretary starts the discussion, we want to see if any commissioners had any questions for the consultants about their work. So we'll take about 5 or so minutes for this.
I would.
Yeah.
And my question really more about inputs and assumptions, just to make sure I've got it. As I looked at the estimated numbers, it's the first time I'd seen those kind of numbers. You're talking about 5.2 to 6.8 billion every year in order to meet net zero?
Yes. So essentially, these numbers come from, we looked at various existing needs estimates. And so some of these came from Princeton's Net Zero America and the Center for Climate Strategies. And so we have more detailed analysis that we provide to MDE on these sources. And so just to flag that this isn't original analysis from Climate Policy Initiative. But yes, these are overall estimates to reach kind of net zero or other significant climate milestones in some of these key sectors. And so I think the key thing to flag here is that this includes private spending needs as well as public. So it's kind of a whole of system approach on these estimates. And we did make some assumptions on annualization here. So some of these estimates covered a different time frame, and we assumed a flat rate of spending across it. So I would say these are estimations, but just to provide a bit of a ballpark range.
But you're talking about, for example, 2.7 billion a year, every year for 25 years for the buildings alone. I mean, in
Yes.
this state where we've got a housing crisis right now because we can't get enough multifamily built.
Yeah, I think like there are really large needs. And I think one of the things this isn't an answer to, that's the estimate that comes from the Building Energy Transition Task Force estimates. So, and I think that there's room for more detailed needs assessments in Maryland, especially to align with the climate finance tracking happening at the state level. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There's an affordability challenge. There are all sorts of challenges that are compounding with the climate challenge as well, and Maryland's goals. I would say one of the things we like to emphasize at Climate Policy Initiative is that economic development and addressing climate change, can be addressed at the same time. But yes, I would say you're right. These are large numbers, but I would say Maryland is on its way to meeting some of them.
And Michelle, just for a point of clarification, these are not incremental or additional numbers. So for example, some of these sectors would already be making investments.
Yes.
So they might not be treated wholesale as it would cost, $6 billion of additional monies to meet the goals. That is a methodological, just clarification. That's fair, right, Michelle?
Yes, absolutely. Some of this spending may already be happening.
The other question I had is under the climate finance flows, you got the blocks showing how much on different energy sources, transport, et cetera. These are not Maryland estimates, right? Because I mean, for example, we have virtually no onshore wind. And we've got currently no offshore wind. So almost all of our renewable, I mean, I do more solar permitting than anybody else in the state, my firm does, but there's no way that we're spending $500 million a year on solar in the state.
So these were estimates that were Maryland focused, that came from our look into our databases. And so I think examples of some of these projects would be something like Dan's Mountain Wind Farm. So some of these projects aren't online yet necessarily because we're really tracking it at kind of the level of when the transaction occurs. So that doesn't necessarily follow disbursement schedule. So that's one thing I would flag from a methodological standpoint that might explain some of that discrepancy of looking at some of these numbers versus what you're seeing on the ground. And I would say just to, perhaps it's useful to clarify, Jared, can I ask you to go all the way to the annex to our data sources slide? Appreciate it. Just to clarify where some of our data comes from, I think it's the next slide. No, maybe it's the next one. Sorry. Here we go. Here are some of our data sources. So we got some of our data, especially for energy and infrastructure, came from Bloomberg New Energy Finance and IJ Global, as well as PitchBook, which kind of covers more of the venture capital ecosystem in Maryland and some of the more climate tech companies working in Maryland. And then you can see some of our other sources as well that we contributed, but just to provide that context for folks.
I understand. The numbers can't be right. We're not spending $377 million a year on onshore wind in Maryland. Nationwide, I can imagine, but it's just doesn't exist. And offshore wind, the only money being spent was planning. Nothing's been built. So I'm looking at those numbers and they don't fit with anything I know about the energy sector in Maryland.
No, super helpful feedback and happy to look through our numbers in more depth at a later point. My email is on the deck as well. And so happy to kind of see and do a little bit more in-depth answer to some of those questions if that'll be helpful.
Mike,
Jennifer, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, I have two questions. The first question is the climate subcabinet did a report on climate spending earlier. And when it did it, the transportation department put all of a subway system into it. So I'm wondering if you put the whole purple line, for example, as if it was a climate expense, when obviously it is several things all at once.
Yeah, that's a good question. We did categorize the purple line spend as climate finance, as it is new bus, light, or heavy rail. And so kind of that new edition of public transit, I think for us classifies it as climate finance spend. In terms of how we handled MDOT's classification, for this analysis, we did follow MDOT's classification of all of its OPEX and CAPEX into public transit as part of its climate finance spend. But more generally, oftentimes CPI and other analyses, we don't necessarily count OPEX as climate finance. But so that's also what you may be seeing in those numbers. But we did include the full purple line, which may not be in fiscal year 2024, but because it's new and it's coming online, we did see that as climate finance.
My second question is about special tax districts. So I know that homeowners associations have the capacity to set up these special tax districts where they can then get zero interest loans to do shoreline restoration. My understanding is that the amount of money available to that is minuscule compared to the need, but it's a huge ROI because it leverages private money for very major projects. I'm wondering if you specifically looked at that. That enables an HOA to do a shoreline restoration project, perhaps next to a county or state road, and pay it out through additional taxes over 20 years instead of all at once. Is that part of what you looked at in terms of innovative ways to bring in outside money?
I can answer it quickly and then pass over to Franz. I think the short answer is no. Adaptation and resilience projects were outside of scope of this analysis, so we didn't look into that. But I think it's a really interesting example. Franz, I don't know if you have anything to add on how that kind of maps onto some of our policy recommendations.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question and the tip. We very much so did want to do more sector analysis, and the scope of the project unfortunately didn't allow us. We were only able to do 3 sectors here: transportation, buildings, and energy. But yeah, I think things like special tax districts or tax increment financing are great ways to think newly about how to draw in more private investment. So I would love to look into more of that and happy to have dialogue offline on that as well, but didn't incorporate any of those directly into these recommendations.
David, did you have?
Mike was making me think, and I was curious if some of the funds here were from RPS, if it was rec money and or ACP. The ACP doesn't go directly to that necessarily, but that was my only. I was curious if that was it.
That's the problem, is that I'm looking at the total spend, and I think I worked on what may be the only on-building project that ever was built in Maryland. It was about 4 windmills.
Yeah. And that's why I was thinking if it was rec money, that Maryland rec money that was flowing to out-of-state land-based wind projects, that was I'm curious. But I'm
If
not.
this is spent on PJM.
Yeah.
I'm happy to look into where those numbers are coming from and can provide clarification via email on that. So can look into that more deeply to provide a better look at what's happening under the hood here.
I think we.
Yeah, but even then, if you add up the numbers, I don't think we're.
Mike, you ever raise that hand a little higher? It would be, the rec should be a part of it. It would not be all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rex could be part of it, but if you added up all the numbers on this page, that's more than we're spending, than we're getting in rec. So.
And this was just a single year of that multi-year investment. So I do recall, Michelle said it also depends on when it shows up as a transaction in the data book. So it could be, this is, I think, FY20.
Fiscal year 24.
Yeah. So it is a yearly snapshot. It doesn't mean, that's why she showed the longitudinal graph, that value may change from year to year as well, rather than that is the case every year.
Right, but I mean, I'm wondering if Jennifer's not right, that things are being counted that are other purposes. Because we're not spending, even with the Rex, I'd be surprised if there's 377 million spent in fiscal year 24 on onshore wind.
I think Dan's Mountain was built that year, so that might be the year. It includes all the private investment and spend to build that wind farm.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So it could
So it's just a one-time thing?
Correct.
Yeah.
That could be.
And so that's why we often, just the fact that Dan's Mountain Wind Farm is in that data set as one of our one of the key projects. And so just the fact that is why generally we're looking at a year snapshot. And so sometimes the numbers are spiky in a given year, just because we're looking at when the financing is more or less committed rather than necessarily when it's dispersed or deployed.
And then the wind, offshore wind would be invested in a program that, at least right now, is not being done.
Yeah, I mean, we are limited in a time frame here of fiscal year 2024. So this is prior to the current administration and some of the roadblocks that are in place in the industry at the moment.
I think I saw maybe 2 more hands, and then we can open up the discussion. Do you have a question?
More of a comment. I just came from another meeting with Bert Foster and Brad Fallon of the Maryland Department of Housing and Development, and they're working on the Opportunity Zone designation. So that will happen this fall for the state, and Opportunity Zone financing could also be, the capital gains tax benefits could also be potential for the building sector and also energy and infrastructure sector. So I don't know, we don't have a representative of DHCD on the commission. That might be something to consider.
Jennifer, I think your hand was up first.
No, sorry.
Oh,
It's
still up.
We covered it.
Okay.
Maybe Darren, and then Secretary could open it.
Yes. I'm going to open it up for a discussion in a second, but let's finish with the technical, and then we're going to have a real conversation.
Yeah, I'm curious as to what's in the giant purple box for battery electric vehicles, because we have a separate box for EV charging. So I'm curious as to the data that underlies that.
Yeah, so that represents our estimate of spend on electric vehicles in Maryland, purchased at the household by households. And so our methodology for this estimate is that we look at the registrations of electric vehicles in Maryland in a given year, and then we map that. And this is a relatively high-level explanation of the methodology. And then we look at the average price of an EV in Maryland from Kelley Blue Book and provide an estimation on electric vehicle spend. So this is household purchase number would we don't double count. So we don't count the, like EV tax credits on top of it because that's part of kind of the total overall price. So there is possibility there are federal and state tax credits are reflected in that number.
Okay, thank you.
I think there was a hand from Secretary Flora.
I did. I didn't want to slow you down from moving into discussion. It's a basic question of, first of all, kudos. This is very exciting to see this analysis and help inform policy. Did you get into any return on investment analysis in terms of if you're doing financing, what would be the term and how could we begin to incorporate the time frame for the return on investments? Because I feel like the numbers are a little, because they're so huge, they're not factoring in necessarily, yes, but the returns are this. Not only the straight line financial returns over time, and yes, some of those might be as long as 20 years, but knowing what that ROI is, and then from a finance standpoint, but then obviously there's a lot of other returns which are more social, environmental, but even if you had the straight line, it would help, I think, in how we think about and present these numbers. So just wondered if you got into that at all.
No, we didn't look into ROI for this analysis. I think it's a great point. And of course, looking at these numbers, we're looking at climate finance flows, but there's of course the economic benefits and those multipliers that come into play. I don't know, Franz, if you have anything else. I know you did a little bit of thinking on ROI, so I don't know if you have anything to add on to that.
Yeah, one sort of next step that, thank you for the question. One sort of next step that this group or some subset may want to undertake is to evaluate what types of leverage you can get out of these different policy approaches. And I think, there are pretty standard return on investment expectations in these different asset classes. So it wouldn't be too much of an extrapolation to start to build out, if we were to offer this type of credit support to, say for storage on public buildings, or actually, sorry. So a good example might be like the school financing platform, where we know that there's interested private capital, we know that there are interested schools. We could very quickly, evaluate the number of sites that are eligible and ready, and then what the ROI, for the private could be, and how that credit support could, make it even more interesting to do all of that very quickly.
Right.
So,
Great. Good to hear. Thank you.
All right. Really good questions. I think we should follow up. These are some really good technical questions. Do you have an idea how best to?
Yeah, I think the team offered to follow up with Mike and Dave, maybe to just look at some of those specific numbers and the data sources, just to ground truth that a bit. Maybe just keep that a small group offline, and then can bring that back to the group with any conclusions later.
Yeah, it may not affect your ultimate conclusion about whether financing in some mechanism is a good idea, right? Because my immediate reaction is a tool that will multiply the money you do put in is going to be good. I just have a problem with the estimates of how much the spend is now and how much we're going to spend. It may be if we focus in on financing as a concept rather than the numbers, then the numbers become less important, but I'm happy to work with it.
That's it. That's a good segue into the discussion that I wanted to have. I see that you have your hand.
Yeah, it's just a technical question. Is this data the same as the controller's data, or these are two completely separate studies?
Really separate.
Okay.
We have different approach, methodological.
That's resilience.
Okay, so I want to come back to one of the big takeaways from in terms of this presentation. We need to better leverage, as we said, public dollars that we already have. So what I would like to advance in terms of this conversation out of the work that we just talked about is how do we come up with a coordinated state climate finance strategy? that's what we need to start thinking about. And I think it needs to when we are thinking about a coordinated finance strategy, we need to think about using our, of course, existing resources, institutions, obviously, to leverage even greater private investment. So the presentation that we just heard about, and it was technical, it's a lot of information, it went really fast. So I wouldn't be surprised if we need to slow down and really dig into that a little more. We didn't have a chance to do that, but we're certainly open to doing that. But the presentation, it used 3 tangible places where we can start. It was clean energy, building carbonization, and storage, and EV charging. So clean energy and storage, building decarbonization, and EV charging. Those were the 3. In each of those areas, there are opportunities where we can use public resources more strategically so that we can reduce the risk and bring more private capital to the table. That's really what we're talking about. It's all about bringing that money to the table. I've already had some initial conversations with Maryland Clean Energy Center, which is a statewide green bank. And I talked to that group and the CEO, the executive director, about how could we begin exploring all the recommendations and identify some of the opportunities that we could use to actually start moving forward in the near future. So what I'd like to do today, we kind of ran out of time, but I'm going to steal some time from the fourth item, which is the teach-in. We're going to just take a little bit of that time so that we, as a commission, we can think about what kind of recommendation from this commission, what recommendation could we possibly come up with to support the development of a coordinated climate finance strategy for 2027. We don't have that now. We have a lot of conversations. Now we have a lot of data that we're questioning some of it, but we don't have that. So I think that's where I'd like for us to start and think about a strategy that focuses on how do we actually increase private investment over the next 4 years and include long-term pilots in private sectors like energy, building, and transportation. And ultimately, the primary measure of success for us, because again, it's all about, we do all this work, what does it mean? So how do we measure success if we were to come up with a climate strategy? We could think about, as a point of measurement, how much additional investment do we actually unlock? That could be a measure for us to think about and to show that we are or are not successful. I think that's the only way we're able to move the needle in this area. You can also think about setting up some kind of financial goal as part of our measure of success. For example, we could organize our state strategy around unlocking, I don't know, let's say $500 million or some number, but let's say $500 million in private investment. That's something we can think about. So I'm really interested in this conversation. I think we should open it up now. The last thing I will say that is that I know we mentioned earlier that the comptroller is going to talk about the report about the cost of climate. So I think this work is really important that we're talking about now in terms of the financing, because it is important to understand how climate change is already costing our economy a lot of money. And I know we know that. So in this context, I see financing and the investment strategy that we're talking about as more of a no regrets kind of strategy. So the more we really think about investing today, the more we can save money over the long haul. And so that's, again, why I think this conversation is important. So why don't we start that discussion out?
I can add some of that.
Is there something on the screen? No. Oh.
we have prepared if we'd like to put some words up on the screen.
Yeah.
Oh, that you just had. Yeah.
Oh,
yes,
okay.
Jared has that.
Oh, okay.
It's basically what.
Oh, okay. So we can go ahead and start the conversation.
Yeah, I just say, I mean, I think financing makes some sense. I mean, an example I've used before is commercial real estate in Baltimore City. Much of it's underwater, so they can't borrow money to do capital improvements. They already own more in mortgages than they do. If you had some way to finance and lower the cost of energy efficiency measurements, that might be better than grants. So I can imagine financing as a concept being something useful. Similarly, on renewables, if you could find a way to lower the financing cost, I think that would be useful. I think may have differences about how much we spend on where the money comes from, but I think financing as a concept, I think.
Yeah. So in terms of thinking about a coordinated climate finance strategy, do you support that?
Yeah, I mean,
as a recommendation.
It'll all be. But yeah, I would support the concept of trying to make the money go further, whatever money we approach it to, by trying to encourage private funds as opposed to grant systems.
Thank you.
I think you mentioned the Clean Energy Center. I think they've got this pretty well. They do this excellently. All the different ways to kind of buy down interest rates, make financing more attractive. They've done this extraordinarily well. So, talked about building this strategy. Certainly, talked to Oddball over there, Chief Finance Officer, and do a really good job.
What will it take for them to unlock more financial or private investment?
I think the number is like 1 to 20 or something like that in terms of money in versus money out. So, I mean, they just capital or take some of that game plan and.
I mean, it's going to take more capital, and where they get that from is a big question. Yeah. And yeah, so I think we're actually currently looking into how we can help MCEC be more independent and be able to live off of its own funding, so it's not.
Oh, I see.
Because to scale, they have to keep taking from state funds. And that's challenging.
Jennifer?
It's challenging for green banks to take from state funds, but I do believe that the C funds going to Green Bank is incredibly effective and efficient way of doing business. I recognize that the scope of this particular project did not include resiliency, but resiliency is a very expensive, important thing. And I think these special interest tax zones are incredibly important and need to be much more heavily funded. And I'd like to see that happen through the CEF, because that can really bring a lot of money from outside of the government.
Do we, is CEF money, are we putting a lot of money already in the bank? Okay.
Yeah, in Green Bank, this year is a record year of 44 million for fiscal year 27.
It's like 45 million. Kind of all the sources.
How much did we?
Which is multiples of what it has been in the past, right?
Oh, so we've increased it a lot. I'm curious, 45 million, how much did it make? Like additional money that we could use?
That's
for
new
investment?
fiscal year 27 funds, so we're
Oh.
not sure yet, but.
Oh, I see.
I have a report they put out that has their return on investment. So all the numbers are there.
Oh, okay.
Yep, if you don't mind, I'd like to expand this to outside of just sub-cabinet agencies to, and like for instance, the comptroller's office, we're not under the sub-cabinet, but I think we would be a useful office to join, maybe the Clean Energy Center and others like that. And then, and to Jennifer's point, I don't know that we should have two different climate strategies, one for just mitigation of climate change and one for resilience and adaptation. Can we not do it all in one? I mean, it'd be a huge undertaking, but I don't know.
Just, there can be a difference because what you're doing is financing the return on investment. If you're looking to financing a solar farm, the guy knows that there's going to be an income coming in, you're trying to lower the interest rate. If you're putting a new shoreline on, there's no, right? So there would be very different programs. Doesn't mean you can't do both, but they're gonna, right?
It could be, if you can loan money instead of grant money out, if that money can come back in, you can basically.
Yeah, if there's a way for the money to come back in. If it's not an income producing investment, then it's a bit tougher to do.
I think and Kim, I was thinking something along the same lines because, you know, the mitigation, the adaptation or resiliency and the decarb are all connected, but they would have very different returns on investment or none at all, sometimes case resilience. I know for the state, we've had a lot of success doing energy performance contracting, which has largely been energy efficiency projects, which do have a clear and measurable return on investment. But as we've moved into decarbonization, that does look really similar. And I think, you know, where we would continue to see success is where we're stacking decarbonization with things like investments in solar that would have, again, another return. So I think that as opposed to looking at this from as separate programs, I'd almost shoot somewhere in the middle where maybe we need to look at this as stacked programs, especially since the comptrollers, you know, looking at the cost of the impacts of climate change, you can't exactly put that on a spreadsheet against the cost of mitigation, but if we have stacked solutions, we could get closer to that.
Thank you, Jennifer, and then Mike. Oh. Mike, did you want to come in and then Brian?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for giving me a second here. I just wanted to mention that, you know, the follow-on to the conversation that was just happening around recurring revenue streams to repay debt service over time. We have that issue a lot in resilience of not having a consistent revenue stream. Sometimes it is possible though, so the conversation shouldn't just, you know, end there. Sometimes, especially with, you know, certain tax districts like I mentioned earlier, or with water related projects, sometimes they have recurring revenue. So there's opportunities there that should be discussed, but it doesn't include everything. Also around the general idea you have here for this climate financing thing, I just want to mention that it seems like the focus here seems to be much more on the climate change mitigation side with energy. And then there's also obviously the resilience and adaptation side, which is currently beginning to be wrangled by our office. We are doing regional workshops to get a project pipeline in place, and then working on capital stacking for resilience and adaptation projects. But that seems to be different than the focus of this, which is more energy focused and you know, mitigative in intent. But I do think that we absolutely need to tie those two efforts together, because ours is also an executive order and legislation. So I just want to make sure that we are, as we're building out what we're building, that we are completely you know, aligning with what's happening with this side of the house.
Yeah, perhaps the recommendation could be broadened to represent the importance of having a coordinated strategy on the mitigation and resilience fronts. This language was stemming from this particular analysis, but the point still stands. Perhaps work on some language and bring that back.
Sure. Great work. It's really, really interesting. Spend hours just kind of pouring up. It's great to have this conversation. And I agree that it should be an objective. I think there might need to be some more kind of formalizing this and putting a finer point on some of the numbers and getting a better handle on what it is that we're actually seeing here. Again, because I think for many of us, this is the first time we've ever seen it. So it's hard to kind of like spin that into a strategy, having just kind of gotten eyes on this for the first time earlier today. But again, I wholeheartedly support this initiative here. Separately, and perhaps this falls under the purview of the MCEC already, but one thing that might be worth considering is venture investing. You know, just speaking from experience, you know, my company Constellation operates a venture capital group that is seeking returns, but it's looking for investments in strategic areas. in businesses that can complement the core business that we operate, which is, running power plants and delivering energy and gas to end use customers. So the idea is, the companies that we're investing in are enhancing our business, the bottom line, but they're also organizations that, have solutions that can be built on top of what we're already doing. And it also gives a window into a lot of what's happening in the future space in terms of new technology developments. So perhaps there's a way to kind of think about a similar kind of strategic investment, right? So we're advocating for, local technology companies that are developing new technologies locally, thinking about how to apply those technologies to climate solutions in the state, then also providing a return to the state that can then reinvest it in the same sort of, the same sort of program.
Something I actually do at Converse is help companies in Maryland do exactly that, to help them find that venture capital. So we use PitchBook to basically find those investors and guide companies to those potential investment sources, and also just help them raise capital.
Right.
So that's something all the time. And sometimes
and it can be a more direct involvement too, as opposed to, just there's this matchmaking, sort of function, right? But then there could be, a more direct sort of engagement as well.
So I think that's, basically broadening and deepening those networks. So wherever we can, we try to make a more friendly introduction to connect them, help get that capital.
I think we've had some really good input on this. One recommendation could be to take some of the feedback we have or welcome any other feedback that if other commissioners have thoughts, and we could work on iterating the language a little bit to bring it back in September or whatever you recommend, Secretary.
I like that. Are you all okay with that? We can work on some language for a coordinated climate financing strategy for 2027. The strategy would include increasing private investment over the next 4 years, as I said before, but also it would include, and this is just an idea, we can change, but include what near-term projects from priority sectors like energy, building, and transportation could we use for the pilot? Right?
Yeah, that could be a necessary component of this.
Yeah. Yes, to be brought up. Did you follow this?
Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer. So my question is, can we be provided an Excel sheet of what fell into each of these categories so that we can see the micro and not just the macro?
The annex has a list of the types of programs that were sorted into each of those buckets. The team can't provide the actual data broken down because of privacy reasons, but we can get as much detail. I think, Michelle, you can comment on this. There is more detail we can provide.
Yeah, I think we can certainly provide more detail about kind of some of the types of projects we saw coming through in our prod, as well as some of kind of like what we're generally seeing in the data, because I think like, as I mentioned before, this is a pilot exercise. And so part of the pilot exercise is the exact, what we're doing here is ground truthing behind what's showing up in the databases versus what people are seeing in the ground. But we can provide some more additional information to kind of give people a sense of what's being included so that the data can be used to help more efficiently guide policy.
Okay. Well, let me think about the order in which we need to move forward for next steps. It sounds like we have two things. Most of you, some of you are interested in understanding a little more deep dive into the numbers that were presented today from the presentation. So that's, to me, action one. How are we going to deal with that? And the second one would be us drafting some language to look at in terms of coming up with a recommendation for climate finance strategy.
The numbers may not be necessarily crucial to what your recommendation is, right? In other words, whether really was 377 million in onshore wind or not. What we're really talking about is money for projected future years. How do you treat that money? So it may be that we don't have to resolve the issues of what really is needed, really part of the central part of the project.
Well, I think it's what you all think. Well, do you all, and maybe we'll do a quick unofficial wave of hands. Do you want a separate deep dive into those numbers, into the presentation, so we can understand climate financing a little better? Or should we move to the next step? I see two hands, you first and then you, and you, three. Okay.
I think it does matter because we want to make sure that we are acting more strongly on the more impactful side of it. And so it's not just what the base number is, but also how you categorize this. Like we've been exploring at MEA, we have grid, transportation, and buildings programs, and we account for them a little bit differently than is done here in terms of end use versus source. So I think it is important that we all are on the same page as to how we speak about this. And then you know that like to leverage 20-to-1 or 15-to-1, you have a better sense of how that's impacting the bigger picture.
But you're talking about how you divide it up, not whether we need 5.2 every year or what the total is. Does that?
Well, how you divide it up tells you whether you're working on the right problem, whether you're working on the right, like whether you're focused in your financing programs in the right sectors.
The bang for the buck idea, I completely agree with. I've said from the beginning, I think we should be looking at how much carbon reduction per dollar spent we ought to have. And I completely agree with that. If the recommendation includes that the state needs to spend 5.2 billion a year, I don't imagine you're going to get any business support for that.
That wasn't what I was just saying as a baseline. We need to make sure we're all on the same page and we are speaking the same language in order to look at where we're making the financing recommendations.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Hannah.
Hannah.
Yeah, I agree with Director Speaks-Bachman, but also the steps seem like they could be concurrent to me, not necessarily sequential.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they're separate initiatives here. I mean, you need to kind of nail down the numbers, but it doesn't change the fact that I think there's general agreement that a financing agenda is or financing strategy is something that is worth pursuing. Right.
Okay, Dave, you had your hand up earlier.
Sorry.
You did.
Oh, I did. Yeah,
You did. No longer?
no longer.
So just to play this out a little bit, we do have to have something to shoot at in terms of the delta, in terms of projected climate finance available and climate finance that's needed to achieve our climate goals, right? So, we do have to have some idea of what we're aiming for in terms of mobilizing additional, capital, so.
Yeah, I think this effort to get a first look and continue to iterate it is what we've been trying to do. For example, on the greenhouse gas spending analysis, we're really proud of the progress we made, but the same thing is we want to get a handle on the public portion of the pie. So we get a first look and then we improve it over time. I think that's the same case here. I think Michelle's team worked hard with the data that they had to give that first look, but that's the whole, we've been talking about next steps. The whole point is continue to refine and improve that because we do need to understand where the gap is.
Right.
I think the most encouraging output of this is that there's a lot of momentum already, right? And that more is needed. And you can know that just from this, even as it's worth to continue.
That's great. I'm sorry. We do need to move to the rest of the agenda. So we'll take offline the continued conversation about the data sources and refining and ground truthing with the interested commissioners and the consultants. And then separately, we're going to work on refining a potential recommendation that would be provided to the commission along with all of the recommendations that the working groups are working on for conversation in September, when the commission will have all the recommendations from the working group. And then this also this one on financing that the commission has been working on in plenary. So those will be the two follow-up areas.
All right, great conversation. Thank you. And thank you, Rick. I appreciate it. I like that. The second presentation that we're about to do or turn over is the ECO co-chairs. Amy and Jabari, you're going to share with us the outcomes from the 4th annual Maryland Climate Teach-In. I had so much fun at the Teach-In Summit in Baltimore. So I'm looking forward to hear more about this year's initiative. So Jabari, Amy, take it away. I think you only have though, let's get back on time. You only have 10 minutes though. Sorry about that.
We will do our best. for that. Okay, hold on. Let me put this in slideshow mode and share screen. Can you see that?
Yes. Yes.
Excellent. Okay. I'm Amy Lambert. I am co-chair of the Eco Working Group, and I'm joined today with Jabari Walker, who is my co-chair, and he's with Bowie State University. And we're gonna do a quick overview of the teach-in. We're gonna start with a little bit of background, discuss its goals, different operational aspects, and then we're going to highlight how it's grown over the years, in participation, sponsorship, and then we'll provide a summary of the summit that we had at Baltimore Poly. And excuse me, I'm going to rush a little bit. So we created the teach-in in 2023. It's a celebration of climate literacy and learning, and we chose April to coincide with Earth Month. The teach-in encourages leaders, community leaders, and educators of folks of all ages to register to participate by incorporating climate into a class or lesson plan or discussion during the month of April. And that plan can take any form, from a hands-on activity to a formal lesson. It can be as small as a Q&A or as large as an Earth Month festival. And you can see two examples of two different teach-ins from this year. On the left, the Primary Day School created a poster about the major domains of the Earth. And on the right, more than 100 fourth graders participated in a Living Classrooms Foundation skipboard program. As part of the teach-in, each year, the governor has declared or released a proclamation on climate education. The first 2 years, he declared Climate Education Week, and the last 2 years, it's been Climate Education Month. This year, we made a concerted effort to increase our outreach efforts. That included hosting our own webinar to provide resources directly to teachers. We also tabled and presented at the Mayo Conference. Again, reaching out directly to teachers. We recorded a radio spot about the teach-in, and then, as usual, we offered online resources, including lesson plans like this Borrow This Approach slide that we have here, as well as a really extensive email campaign. And, you know, those efforts have paid off. We had 383 educators register to host a teach-in this year. That's a 15x growth since the beginning. 2025, we should note that we changed over from a teach-in being a week-long event or celebration to a month-long celebration. But that allowed greater flexibility for teachers and more opportunities for us to scale up. Here you see a couple more pictures. On the left is DNR's clothes swap, which I think is such a great idea. On the top right is Lamont Elementary's trash pickup. And on the bottom right is the Radcliffe School kids doing some gardening. All right, so this is a breakdown of registrants from this year. You can see public schools are definitely the primary registrants, 67.2%, and education overall altogether represents about 81%. So there's definitely room to grow in all sectors, but definitely outside of the public school system. And this breaks down by geography. We covered 20 different counties and cities in Maryland. Note that there's an other category, and the other category is for registrants that didn't provide us an exact address that we could lock into a county or city. Once again, Prince George's County is the clear participation hub here. They had 140 events and represented more than a third of the participation. After them, it's Baltimore City, Howard, Anne Arundel, and then Baltimore counties. And together, the top 5 jurisdictions really represent more than 3/4 of the participation in the event entirely. We had 4 counties that did not participate at all this year: Allegheny, Caroline, Talbot, and Somerset. The first 2, Allegheny and Caroline, had teach-ins last year and not this year. So that suggests that we've lost a little bit of our statewide reach, but have gained traction in, you know, key population centers. So we definitely need to address that in 2027. And 2 more pictures. On the left is Northview Elementary's schoolyard forest program. They're planting trees. And on the right, it's horticulture and planting activities at Crossland High School. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jabari.
All right, thanks, Amy. Good afternoon, everyone. So as we're constantly looking at ways to improve the event each year, during last year's planning, we looked at having sponsors because we know there are entities out there who appreciate, support, and want to be involved in the work that we do. And that offering prizes was a good incentive to participate. So Jennifer Laszlo Mizrahi's group, the Mizrahi Charitable Fund, has been a generous donor for, I guess, for really both of these years and contributing $2,000. And this year we were excited that Constellation Energy came on board as well. That level is considered our climate leaders, and Amy's employer, EA, also contributed $500. Our in-kind partners, you can see below. Mayo is the agency that we funnel the funds through since they are registered 501c3. So they're a major help. And Attune also provides free air quality monitors, which is one of our prizes. So if we can go to the next slide. The top 2 prizes of $1,000 basically goes towards the K-12 educators, cover things like transportation or field trips. As you can see, we have 5 prizes up to $500 for different environmental projects. And then we also have the 3 free set of Attune air quality monitors. After April, we sent out a digital certificate of completion to all of our registered participants as a keepsake and a memento of participating in the event. And basically what you see here is pretty much just a sample of that. So the other element that we added a few years ago was to hold a kickoff event to kick off Climate Education Month. We've held the events at the home school of our teach-in spokespersons, I guess you can call it. And this is our 3rd such year doing this. And this year we labeled a summit since it was, rather than a kickoff, this was already in the middle of the month. But the idea was the same: a celebratory event to emphasize the importance of climate education and to showcase what our participants all across the state are doing. First 2 years were at Annapolis High School and Cecil School of Technology, respectively. And then this year it was at Baltimore Polytechnic Institute, home to Miss Vicki Matthew. She's an incredible, enthusiastic spokesperson. She's a biology teacher at Poly. Also, their sustainability point of contact. She's a leader of many of their green clubs, including the Aquaponics Club, the Green, I think, Global Gardens, maybe, also Recycling Club. However, the event actually, it wasn't just Poly students. There were 123 total attendees, and students represented 4 schools: Western High School, ACCE, and Baltimore Design School. And so hopefully everybody in this meeting now, recognizes all 4 people in that picture. Now, the person that is not part of the commission is Ms. Vicki Matthew in that picture. All right, next slide. So the agenda was by far the most robust one we've had for this event. As you can see in the slide here, we had a full day starting with breakfast with introductory comments, including from our own commissioner, Secretary McElwain. Then we broke off into 4 groups for rotations, workshop sessions, about 20 minutes apiece. The aquaponics lab, one of the students actually took us on a tour of the facility and kind of spoke about that process. Isomer, I think is what it's really referred to, the international, excuse me, I can't remember, the student-led Arctic monitoring and research. They kind of showed us some of the data collection methods. We got to review some live specimens through microscopes. We had a plant your own seeds event in the courtyard, and the people there kind of helped us, walk us through the process. We take those home and grow. I won't say how mine did, but there was an assortment of vegetable and herb seeds to take home. And then we had a demonstration of the weather station as well. So after the sessions, we took a walk across the street to nearby Hillside Park for lunch. We thought it was important to have an outdoors element of the event. And it just so happened that day was hot. You saw by the pictures what we had on. It was hot that day, like mid-80s, which is hot for mid-April. But we had such an incredible time. There was no complaints. The lunch was provided by Fishnet, a local food truck service in Baltimore, and the food waste and containers were mostly compostable, and we did have bins on site for that. After lunch, Secretary McElwain presented the governor's proclamation of Climate Education Month to Ms. Matthew. Y'all saw that in the previous picture. Then we planted a tree at Hillside Park in honor of the event. And I think that's one of the pictures coming up, Amy, maybe. So we finished up the day's events with some additional workshops, which included discussions on, as you all can see here, AI. There was a green careers question and panel. We talked about some composting in the cafeteria, how that works, and then also some nature journaling and sketching. I don't know this slide. Local WJZ also covered the event. They were there. However, I don't think we believe we made the cut that day on the Feature Live News, but they were there. And this is a picture showing our summit partners. All these folks were involved in this event. So basically, I want to thank, Amy and myself want to thank everyone on ECO, specifically the Teaching and Planning Committee. We meet more than half of the year for this. Not just for this event, but for the entire Climate Education Month process. And I want to thank our partners involved, as well as those on the commission who supported. And I think we made a 10-minute cut, hopefully. So thank you all for your time.
You did. Thank you.
No problem.
This program is amazing. I don't know if all of you are involved, but I had the time of my life. Watching the students and planting, and you can see the sponsors and all the things that they did to make this event amazing. I'm telling you, if you're not involved, I recommend that you follow up and get involved. It's incredible. I spent all day there, I believe, that day.
Yes.
Didn't I?
Pretty much.
Yeah, I didn't want to leave.
I know. It was incredible. And actually, Miss Matthew and her team of students really did a huge part in planning this whole thing. So I don't think she's on this call, but shout out to her and the students at Poly for making this happen. And thank you, Secretary McElwain, for being a part of this. And yes, we would like to encourage everyone here to be a part of this in some way or another as we go forward.
That's right. That's right. It's amazing. Yeah, please do get involved if you want, but I'm telling you, it is amazing and it makes you feel good. You know, as a commission, all the things that we're doing, this work group and just giving back. It just, wow, it's those moments that really make me proud to be in this business and to be a part of all that we're doing. Thank you for all that you do.
Absolutely.
Appreciate
Thank you.
both and caring enough to do it every year. All right, so now we're going to move on. We have the comptroller's report up. We're really grateful to be joined by our fellow MCC Commissioner, Comptroller Learman. I don't know if you're on or not.
I'm here. I'm sorry. I have a new computer and I can't get my camera to work. So, but I'm
That's
here.
Right. We hear your lovely voice. That matters even more. So we're going to provide an update to the climate change cost report and the findings, and I guess any financial impacts on greenhouse gas emissions to the state. So Comptroller, you have the floor. Welcome again. We're so happy you're here.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Sorry to not be in person or on camera, but excited to be here with you all and really excited about how things are going with the cost of climate change study. You all know Kim Pezza on our team, who has been fearlessly leading this effort and coordinating within an extraordinary interagency work group, as well as keeping our external partners informed, keeping the legislators who led this effort informed, and more. I want to thank you, Secretary McElwain, and all the secretaries and agencies that are really supporting this work by making your staff available for that work group and dedicating so much staff time to support the data requests from the consultant. We're really excited, and I'm excited to really fulfill what I believe is a core responsibility of my job, which is to provide lawmakers and Marylanders with a clear and comprehensive understanding of the costs that are facing our state. And this study is a major part of that. So we are going to deliver a data-driven accounting of how greenhouse gas emissions have impacted Maryland's budget, our infrastructure, our economy, both historically and looking forward, over the long term. So I'm also excited that we have worked to bring in the Center for Climate Strategies. You can see their slide geared up and ready to go to help conduct this study as we work to coordinate things. And so I am going to turn it over to Tom Peterson, who is the president and CEO of the Center for Climate Strategies, to walk us through this fiscal assessment, this study, so that folks understand where we are, what we're doing, and what's coming. Thank you.
Well, thank you and welcome everybody. I am going to give you an overview of the work that is in progress and a little bit of what's under the hood and then what's coming next. As was just indicated, we are working with an interagency work group through the Comptroller's office. So we have been sharing quite a bit of information with that group. We won't be providing all of that here because it is extensive, but we'll be commenting on how that's going and where some of the key points of intersection are. Go ahead. The RENEW Act calls for some specific analyses and estimations. The first is what we would call the cost of climate change or the cost of inaction. And it's the past and future cost of greenhouse gas emission impacts on the state. To be clear, this is examining the effect of global radiative forcing on the state of Maryland. As we do that, we are looking at a series of economic sectors and natural systems. We'll show you more detail around that in a minute. But the legislation specifically called out some key areas of risk exposure for evaluation, which are part of the longer list that we are examining. We also see in the legislation the requirement to evaluate the cost of taking action, the cost incurred by the state to actually mitigate the effects of greenhouse gas emissions. In other words, trying to put in place specific strategies and measures that respond to the vulnerabilities that are created by climate change. And just so we don't trip over terms, the term mitigation with respect to climate change typically is referring to efforts to reduce the underlying causes of risk and vulnerability, or the buildup of greenhouse gases that lead to radiative forcing, and then the series of follow-on effects there. Adaptation refers to absorbing the effects of that or adjusting to them or avoiding them in some way. So it's an adaptive strategy rather than addressing the underlying causes. You will hear sometimes the terms used interchangeably. Just to be clear, what we are looking at here in this study is adaptation. It is the cost of climate change impacts to the state and the cost of addressing those impacts through adaptation or resilience actions. There's another component of the legislation to review the question of whether some sort of compensation mechanism to help finance those costs of adaptation strategies and measures would result in a cost pass through to taxpayers. So the results of this work are due December 1st. We anticipate there will be some follow-on work with some of the communications information that will be helpful for its applied use. But this is really the nutshell of the requirements of the legislation. Go ahead. Just to restate this, we'll be looking at cost of inaction, costs and benefits of action, and then this pass-through analysis. The cost of inaction that we're looking at is 30 years backwards and 30 years forward. I'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of where we are looking in terms of areas of exposure, but that is the basis of this. And then what flows out of that is an identification of areas of likely vulnerability that require some sort of resilience response action that can then result in a cost estimate. And then, as I described, there will be later on the cost pass-through analysis. Go ahead. Just a refresher here in terms of what is driving climate change. The listing you have in front of you here are literally known as physical climate impact drivers. And what we have underneath each of them, then there's a set of 5, are changes in physical conditions that result from that. And in turn, they become what we call hazards. So the key things here are temperature, and just a reminder, that can be hot and cold. Precipitation can be wet and dry. Wind is both ground level and higher levels, sea level rise, and then warming induced air pollution. The other note to remember is that some of these changes are acute and episodic. Others are gradual and long-term. So we have a combination of those short and long-term effects. The classic long-term effect is the change in growing seasons. The classic short-term effect would be an extreme weather event. Go ahead. Structurally, the assessment looks at a wide range of economic sectors and natural systems. So the legislation calls for an examination of the effects of climate change on the state of Maryland. And the way we tackle that is by breaking that into a discrete set of economic sectors and natural systems. And that is separate from looking solely at the question mark of how individual agencies and offices are affected. That is really not the basis of this study. And we'll be showing you those sectors and systems in just a minute. And so within that structure of sectors, we of course have subsectors, and then we have activities or functions or services that are provided within them. And so we classify these generally as activities, but what we have is a combination of structure and function within the different economic sectors and natural systems in the state. And that becomes important because we will show you in a moment how we introduce climate change impact drivers and hazards into those systems and identify their points of intersection and the implications of that. But of course, these also affect populations, both human and natural populations, that are affected by the changes in climate conditions and changes in hazards within these sectors and these systems. And finally, these are place specific. This is a statewide analysis. On the other hand, many of these effects are more localized than that. And so we're using a climate modeling system that will at least give us county level breakdowns. We can go quite a bit lower than that as needed, but that's generally the geographic scale at which we're able to look at here in terms of the development of relevant climate change indicators. Go ahead. This is a set of 16 sectors and systems. Actually, the original set was 24. And you could stretch the rubber band and make it longer than that, because the truth of the matter is that climate change gets into everything one way or another. But we've really boiled this down to a set of 16 to be used for a pretty comprehensive framework in terms of exposure to climate risk and vulnerability in the state of Maryland. We merged a couple things like commerce and economic development to try to shrink wrap this just a little bit. But this is a pretty big set that we're working through. Go ahead. You can circle back to this one when you have more time, but we're dealing with a complex system. So we see, as I've mentioned, the introduction of changes in climate impact drivers as a consequence of changes in the overall climate. And that results in changes in physical conditions that affect all these different sectors and systems. And we see these playing out in a variety of different ways. And so there's a really broad range of these effects over a really broad range of activities within these sectors and systems. And as I mentioned earlier, as we go through all that, we're dealing with both abrupt and longer term climate change, dealing with various uncertainties, but we're dealing with the systems that are integrative. There's lots and lots of overlap and interaction between all of this. We're also dealing with something we call cascading effects, which is once the ball gets rolling in one spot, it snowballs. And so we have to pick that up as well. So the bottom line here is that the approach for analysis here is to use an integrative approach that's comprehensive. And we'll show you a little bit more about what that means in the upcoming slides. Go ahead. Just to give you a little bit more sense of where this goes in terms of sector level and system level hazards, this is a listing of some of the more common hazards that exist in these different areas of exposure in the state of Maryland and in other areas. Once again, you can see there is a wide range in every sector and system of potential hazards. And so what we're doing is pinning these down so that we're matching them with the structure and function of the sector and system to identify ones of the greatest potential impact that also are feasible in terms of analysis. A little bit of the process we're going through here. Again, this is just 4 out of 16 sectors and systems we're looking at, but these are pretty big ones in the grand scheme of things. Go ahead. The overall scientific process here is very standard and well established. The use of climate modeling to project forward, shifts in climate impact drivers, changes in conditions, and ultimately hazards, then going through risk analysis, which is identifying exposure, sensitivity, and magnitude, then translating that into vulnerability by comparing the elevation and risk exposure to current and projected adaptive capacity. You see where the gaps are, and then to target and respond to those gaps through adaptation responses. And we will repeat this across not just every sector and system, but every single specific area of analysis that we do. But of course, they'll be customized to the particular dimensions that we need for each analysis. But we use a standard replicable format that's extremely well established. Go ahead. A little bit more detail around this. The climate science, we've generated downscale climate projections into the impact drivers and then the stressors and hazards that I just mentioned. We then move on there to vulnerability, which is looking carefully at the elevation and risk exposure with the dimensions that are built into that, comparing that to existing and projected business as usual adaptive capacity, and then pulling out of that a vulnerability assessment. And then finally, translating that into a cost of the vulnerability gap, that level of vulnerability that does not have responses built already into the system, if you will. And what we pull out of that then are the strategies and measures that could be used to respond at least partially to those things, and then putting some costs on those impacts. Go ahead. So this is maybe the better schematic of how we go through this. It's a linear, sequential, logical flow that's science-based, but involves quite a bit of translation throughout. We start with the changes in the climate at the very top level. We go to the changes in the impact drivers. We go then to changes in hazards. Then we go into the sectors and where those hazards intersect with the activities and the assets involved in these sectors and systems, recognizing that there's a lot of overlap and interaction, as I mentioned before. From there, we go into the literal process of identifying risk exposure, adaptive capacity, and vulnerability levels. And then that guides us into the evaluation of the cost of that vulnerability as it currently and is projected to exist, and then the cost of actually responding to it. So these are the basics. This is the basic series we are going through, again, that really reflects the scientific core process that we have. Go ahead. We wanted to give you a sneak peek on just one example, and this is for education. What's behind this is, surprise, surprise, a kind of a massive spreadsheet system that we have that has all of these sectors and systems with many, many different breakdowns in it. And what we've been able to do with that is do some structural breakdowns. We call this taxonomy of each sector. We do hazard mapping and identification, and then we go into the actual evaluation of this that I've gone through before. But we do this across a broad range of areas, and this involves activity areas that are not always so easily known in terms of having exposure to climate change. And what you'll see is, I think, a lot of what may be surprises in some areas about things that really are sensitive to climate that we may not have realized. So we're trying to pick up the full range of these things and make sure we are not missing significant effects that may happen. And there will be some areas here of effect that may not be, the poster children of climate change. So education is one of these. Go ahead. Right. Education has got a breakdown in taxonomy in the first box here, the hazard breakdown in the second box. What we're talking about in terms of loss mechanisms, areas where the activities and assets are specifically impaired or affected, and then the support for the analysis of this through data. So throughout this entire process, the analysis methodology here is that you identify data sources, methods, and key assumptions. And with respect to data sources, we are working very hard to not only use best available data, but data from Maryland. So this is where the work with the Energy Agency Work Group is so important. There are many different agencies involved, many different people involved in this effort right now. We really appreciate the effort that is being engineered here by all the agencies to be supportive of this. But this would be an example of the education sector in some initial key areas in this first box that flow through this that we're looking into. Go ahead. So a little bit more detail on education here. We're looking at the combination of buildings and facilities as well as service activities related in education. And once again, where that goes in terms of the exposure to hazards and then the vulnerability effects and how we can actually respond to those. And then where we are looking for specific information and studies to support that. Things like establishing a cause and effect relationship between the climate hazard and some impact that takes place. So we're working through this in schools as we are in the other sectors. Go ahead. Well, I think that's it for the moment. There's an awful lot we didn't say and share here, but maybe later we'll have a chance to do that. But a couple of key things that have been part of the conversation that we've been having with the interagency work group is to be sure we're covering climate risk areas of greatest interest and concern. And, part of the lens here is we want to make sure we understand what the people of Maryland believe to be the greatest areas of concern and impact. We want to understand the state agency's viewpoint of that and how that translates into the identification of areas of exposure to cover. It's a very big issue because the different permutations of climate risk exposure that result from a comprehensive study like this are thousands upon thousands. So prioritizing is crucial. And so we're working with the agencies on that, as well as data collection assistance. And then we're beginning to take a sneak peek at the next set of issues, which is the actions that would be put in place and the costs around them. So I'll quit there and open the floor to any comments and questions that you all may have, but really do appreciate the time together with you today. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a minute for questions. Yes. See your hand up.
I have one too.
Hi, this is Russ Dickerson. If I might make a quick comment. Thank you. That's a very thorough analysis. I think it's very important. You will notice this summer has unprecedentedly poor air quality. There are two reasons for that. One is it's hotter and drier in Canada and on the West Coast, and we're getting their smoke. But we've had an unprecedented number recently of events in ozone. And part of that is that it's hotter. Part of that is that emissions may actually be going up. These have substantial and immediate health impacts for the citizens of Maryland. And so we are experiencing these costs already right now.
Dr. Dickerson, we have Mike Powell and then Dr. Goldstein.
Yeah, I just had a question on the four items that the Renew Act required to be in the study. The fourth one was, and I pulled it up, an economic analysis of whether the cost would be passed on to taxpayers of requiring fossil fuel companies that had more than $1 billion of emissions to compensate the state. How are you analyzing that? Because I assume that would be something like, are the gas companies going to raise the cost of gasoline or something? But how are you answering that question in the study?
So we are not involved in that part of the study at this stage. And we'll be structuring that and happy to talk more about that in the future. But I would just note that the cost of climate change to the state of Maryland, that and the cost of responding to those, to actually putting in place adaptation strategies and measures in response to that, is based on the impacts of global climate change to Maryland. There's a separate question mark, which is the level of emissions that are generated within Maryland by anybody, whether it's a specific set of emitters or otherwise, and what the effects and responses are to that. And so it's a different analysis, and we'll be approaching that differently when we get there.
Gotcha. So somebody else is doing that analysis, you're not?
We are.
Oh, you are doing that? I'm okay. I'm maybe talking about different things. Are you doing the analysis on basically the compensation from large petroleum companies? Is that part of your analysis, or is somebody else doing that?
We will be doing the analysis that addresses the part of the legislation that is looking at a compensation mechanism to be determined and to be further developed.
Okay, my confusion is because that's specifically spelled out in the statute. That's the one that the study has to address. And I'm just trying to figure out how that particular issue is being addressed.
And that's going to be a later stage analysis we do. The focus of this conversation is on the other components of the legislation, on the cost of inaction and the cost of action.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike. Dr. Gilden?
Yes, thank you. Just real quick, because I know we're running out of time. Dr. Gilden, School of Nursing, Public Health. I'd just like to comment that I think you're missing some things under the health, and I would be happy to help you figure that out. And this is a wonderful presentation, and I look forward to hearing more about it.
We would like to take you up on your offer to help and be in touch, because that's the name of the game here, is to identify analyzable areas of exposure. And we're all ears if you can help with that process, because there are many.
That's great. So then a couple in the room, we have Darren and then Jennifer.
Yeah, just to be clear, so part of the outputs to this work will be a monetized assessment of the costs of climate change to Maryland, right? And that should, right? So it would be $1 figure, will be like a set of dollar figures, do you know, Tom?
Well, there are two numbers here in the first set. One is the number associated with the cost of climate change without any action taken, and the second is a number associated with the cost of taking action. The numbers, and we haven't certainly finalized this, but the number or numbers that we present may well involve some sensitivity analysis. They may be involving some different levels and classes of analysis that we're working with here, because we're going to be looking at a really broad range of different types of analyses and different types of data that are available to support them. So we're going to be classifying all that and see where that leaves us in terms of the best way for this all to be represented. At a minimum, though, we are going to have certainly a fiscal impact number on both, which is going to be a base number that we can deal with. But we'll try to provide additional information around that to really put in context as best as possible what the numbers look like.
But it sounded like you were suggesting that as a follow-up to mine. There were 4 things in the Renew study that had to be done, right? He's talking about the first 3. I'm asking about the 4th one, which was particularly about a charge to large petroleum companies.
Yeah, what I'm saying is you can't, I assume the logic is you can't arrive at that number without first getting a handle on
Yeah,
it.
if it's not yet been done, but just the next analysis, I would just ask them how it was going to be done. If they haven't decided that yet, I understand. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. And
Yes.
then we'll have time. I see another hand after Jennifer, sorry, and we are running up against time.
So a couple technical questions. You are measuring only the cost to the state or to the cost of everybody and everything in the state? So for example, with if there's saltwater intrusion in people's wells and the county needs to put county water there, or there's issues with septic, that's generally a county expense. Are you counting all of the different expenses that happen in Maryland, or just the ones that the state of Maryland picks up?
We're looking our interpretation of the word state is it's a geographic designation, and that will encompass, of course, all localities within the state. It's also covering all residents, and we are including not only human populations, but natural populations as well.
Okay, so that was the first question. The second question is, I don't know if you heard the earlier presentation on cost, but the earlier presentation allocated 100% of a subway line to climate, which I don't think people building the purple line did it for climate reasons. That's a nice bonus of what we got. But how would you look at things like that? Because ultimately we will be looking to fossil fuel companies to give us money, and we need to be fair and not charge them for things that we did for other reasons.
Well, so we're looking at incremental effects. There's a baseline here in terms of the scenario with climate change that has not yet been acted upon. And that scenario, well, let me take it back. It's a scenario in which, in terms of the impact of climate change, has occurred and is projected to occur without action that has not yet been committed to. And then in terms of the cost of action, it will be incremental to those costs that are already in place. To give you just a quick example here, for metro stations that suffer flooding, the risk exposure is that there will be flooding that will interrupt commuting. And the adaptation capacity for that are pumps, water pumps, to clear it out. The question is, how many pumps exist in comparison to the projections of additional flooding that is estimated to occur? And it will be some level, and that level is either equal to the amount of future projections, so we don't need to worry about it, or no, it's not. So we're going to have to put more pumps in, and there's a cost associated with that.
That's super helpful. My last question is, are you categorizing these expenses so we know what's state government, what's county government, what's private sector, et cetera?
In terms of the actual sources of funds and responsible parties for funds, I think our focus is on assessing the costs that from whatever source are involved in the response action. To the extent possible, we'll do attribution of that, but this is not a study to really pin down the detailed sources and uses associated with these actions. It's rather to establish, a fiscal impact number associated with that. We would like to do as much detail as possible, but we recognize that's a lot of information. So we authored a study a couple of years ago, which was comprehensive on the investment requirements to meet the climate change plan in Maryland. It's online, you can see it, and it's a full rendition of different technologies in the state that could be deployed for that purpose. And the next stage of that is what you heard about in the prior conversation, which is then moving this into financial structure, matching sources and uses, and going through all of that. That's another level of detail. The first step is you want to try to structure things and understand the characteristics and the levels of those costs before you go there. So this study is really not designed to do that, but it will certainly stage set for that.
That's great. We are a couple minutes past time, so I suggest, Chair, that we end conversation now. We provide Tom's information for any additional technical questions people didn't get a chance to ask. We thank the comptroller and Tom for the presentation. Yeah, I'm sure we'll hear more as the study progresses and we start seeing some results. That's the very
what a great
Thank you.
conversation. Looks like we have.
Thanks, everyone.
I think.
We do have Delegate Stein.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you. So we'll have to follow up. So sorry, Delegate Stein. We can follow up on that point as we close here. Appreciate that, Delegate.
And he said, I didn't say something. I didn't.
Yeah, but we didn't get a chance to.
Oh, well,
But we
go ahead.
could. All right, Delegate Stein. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'll be quick. First, again, thanks to the controller and to Tom for doing this critical study on your cost estimates. I guess the bill said coming up with adaptation cost estimates where available data can be identified. So I take it you'll be looking at what other states may have already done for a particular sector, as well as relying on, where that isn't the case, relying on expert data or expert analysis of what might be required. Is that right?
Yeah, our first place to go is Maryland-based data, and we're working closely with all the agencies, not all, but a heck of a lot of them on that question. However, we can access out-of-state data and go through a translation process. It's called benefits transfer for that. We will be looking at other methods that may be possible as well that could generate those kinds of estimates. So we're going to be looking at a range of different ways to generate that necessary data.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you, delegates. Time for your patience.
All right, I know we're over. Sorry about that. I guess I'm not good at keeping time. So sorry. We're going to meet again September 14th, and we'll start our deliberation on recommendations for the commission's annual report, Governor and General Assembly. The recommendations from the working groups, as a reminder, are due to the commission by September 1st. And all the recommendations will be packaged by staff and distributed to commissioners ahead of the September meeting, along with more detail on the recommendation process. Did I get that right? Okay. So thank you all for coming. I won't keep you any longer. This was a great conversation. More to come. I appreciate all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adjourned.